These are fun, off-the-cuff discussions on movies and streaming series, both new and old.
Together, we'll attempt to bridge the gap between Hollywood industry insider and the casual viewer.
This is Alec.
And I'm Ben.
And you're listening to the Cinema A to B podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the first ever live streamed episode of Cinema A to B. So Ben, we've been doing this just about a year now. This is our 50th episode, so we want to do something special. So obviously we're live streaming this. So if you missed a live stream, no worries. It's going to be put up on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. And for our audio only listeners, you're going to get it too. So don't worry, you're not going to miss this episode. But we wanted to pick something fun. We wanted to pick something enjoyable. And I think this movie is pretty high up on our list for both of us. We're going to be talking about 2000's Guy Ritchie film, Snatch. So, Ben, I'm going to start you off with a question before getting into your thoughts. There's a theory out there, because there's a lot of battle between what is better, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels or Snatch, okay? There's always that argument of which one's the better film. And there's a theory out there that talks about whichever one you watched first, that's the one generally you think is best. So, my first question is, which one did you watch first? And then also, which one do you think is best?
I watched Snatch first.
Okay.
And I think Snatch is best.
All right.
So the theory holds true.
It does.
For one more person.
Well, and I'm going to, I saw Snatch first as well. That's the one I gravitate towards. Well, as much as I love Lock, Stock, Snatch I think, is the better film. But anyways, so with that, got that out of the way, how do you feel about Snatch?
It's like I fell in love with it all over again. Mm-hmm. Watching it recently. It had been a while. This movie holds a really special place in my heart, and for good and bad reasons. I think I saw it first in college on DVD. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I went to a college where I wasn't supposed to have that DVD. It was a very strict Bible college, and there were not supposed to be any R-rated films in your possession. And I'm coming clean now. I had it hidden away. And we all watched it a lot. In fact, so much that I believe I did either one or two short films in undergrad heavily inspired by Snatch. And the films themselves didn't get us in trouble, but the outtakes did.
Of course.
And that's a whole story on how the disciplinary committee of that college found those outtakes on VHS, I believe. And we got in a lot of trouble for that because we used as much profanity as they use in Snatch.
Which is constant.
But yeah, And the love for this movie went even further than that into graduate school where I went to film school. There were a group of us that just thought that the editing in this film was next level. And it was always something we were wanting to try to emulate. Mm-hmm. That quick cutty MTV style. And I really credit Guy Ritchie and his editor for bringing that into mainstream feature filmmaking. This feels like the first one that really did that. Mm-hmm. And it starts at the very beginning of the movie, after they walk through security and then reveal that they're not rabbis, but in fact that they're robbing this jeweler. The edits are still insane.
Yeah.
The freeze frames, warping the image, twisting it, going back in, speed ramps. You hadn't seen a lot of speed ramps until that movie. So this thing, I kind of put it as a landmark thing sitting there at 2000, even though I think it came in the US in 2001.
It did.
Yeah.
That's when I saw it. So there's not much to say. So I recently watched this as well, and it had been a couple of years, and I'm kicking myself for I'm thinking to myself, why is this not in my top 5? I mean, it's in my top 10, but I'm like, this movie is fantastic. Like every bit, the acting, the dialogue. I mean, Guy Ritchie wrote this thing himself. I think he had a little bit of help maybe, or no, just himself. And I mean, it's so smart. It's so quick. It's so funny. I mean, it is a heist movie, but there's so much going on in this film that I just absolutely love. And I don't know why it's not higher. I mean, like, there's so many good films. But honestly, thinking about it and looking at it, Guy Ritchie is probably one of my favorite directors of all time. I mean, the movies that he's done, I mean, he's had, they haven't all been winners. Some have been but I mean, Lock, Stock, obviously, we were just talking about. Snatch, I love this. But I mean, you got Rock and Rolla, the Sherlock Holmes. You've got The Gentleman, which came out a couple years ago, which I really enjoyed. I mean, a lot of these movies have the same vein of like Snatch or Lock, Stock, but they're still so enjoyable. They're still so quick. There's still so much that pulls me in and makes me watch it. That Guy Ritchie definitely has something of, he knows how to grab his audience. He knows how to get them involved in the story and how to let them forget that they're watching a movie and just kind of go along with the story. We kind of talked about like Ocean's 11 was kind of like a ride where it started and boom, all of a sudden you're at the end and you're like, just pull it along. That's how I feel about Guy Ritchie films, and especially with Snatch. Like you said, I mean, it opens with that little, narration by, oh my goodness, by Turkish or whatever. Yeah.
By Turkish.
Oh yeah, by Turkish at the beginning and stuff like that. But then it goes into the rabbi stuff and kind of rolls the credits, and that's interesting. I mean, I felt it's always been very like Reservoir Dogs kind of feeling, because he's kind of the whole like talking about the virgin birth, where they were talking about Madonna's like a virgin. Like, it almost feels like it's somewhat of a nod of like, hey, Tarantino.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, but it's so much fun. You talked about the quick cuts. There's so many great shots in this. There's so many good, how do I say it? Like, ways that they edit. It's not boring at all. Like, just the visuals by themselves are so bring you into this movie and make you want to continue to watch it.
Yeah, watching it. Well, the first thing that comes up is the opening credit comes up, and I see produced by Matthew Vaughn. Mm-hmm. And I bet the first 20 times I've seen this, I didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
And now, in looking back, that's the guy that directed Layer Cake, X-Men First Class, all the Kingsman films. So he was his producer on this, and I believe he produced Lock, Stock as well with them, and then went on to forge his own very successful directing career. So there's a lot of talent on hand to make this movie. Where do we kind of start? It is a very smart film, and the dialogue is so good that it almost doesn't matter that a couple of the leads don't really have much acting experience outside of showing up in Lock, Stock first.
Yeah.
I was amazed at how good a performance like he gets out of Vinnie Jones as Bullet Tooth Tony. And Vinnie hadn't been in that many movies. I mean, not at all. And yeah, that whole scene with him sitting in the pub with Desert Eagle .50, and I was paying more attention to that performance than I probably had in previous viewings, and I was like, this really holds up. So there's some other performances in it that are a little hit and miss. I don't think Statham's performance has aged quite as well in some areas, but he's still really good as Turkish, and a good casting decision. Mm-hmm. This cast is really deceptively deep with Farina as Avi, and
Dennis Farina.
He gets plenty of the late Dennis Farina. He gets plenty of screen time, and he's great. So it goes well beyond Pitt. In fact, Pitt almost feels like an afterthought after watching it again. It was like, and I guess Pitt didn't want to do it because it was so close to Fight Club, but he was like, I want to work with Guy Ritchie, and just went ahead and was willing to basically take another kind of fighting bare knuckle boxing movie. But it's such a different role. I don't think that concern was legitimate.
Well, so he had actually approached Guy Ritchie and was like, I want to be in one of your films. And then Guy Ritchie was like, you're going to be the boxer in this. And that's when he was kind of like, well, don't want to do another fight thing to get typecast. But like you said, he wanted to work with Guy Ritchie so much. And I think obviously it worked out. Now, originally he was not supposed to be a pikey. He was supposed to be a British guy, but I guess Brad Pitt couldn't nail down the London accent. So he was just like, do some random like gypsy, whatever thing, and just make it as unintelligible as possible. Okay, but real quick, my favorite thing about the DVD of this movie is the fact that there is a subtitle track just for Brad Pitt's character. Like
Yes,
everyone else
just for
you find, it's just him. Like, and not even the other Pikeys, just Brad Pitt. Like I
Yes.
loved it. Like it was because
And
he's
I've
so
wa-
unintelligible.
Yeah, and I've watched it. It took me a while to find out how to access that. After I'd had the disc for a couple years before I realized you could dig in and find the Pikey subtitling.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really add anything. In fact, I think it's funnier to really not be able to tell what he's saying
Yeah.
than to get a translation. But he's obviously very good. But I don't want us to turn this discussion into a quote fest but the reality is this is maybe my this might be the most quotable movie of all time for me. And shout out to a former coworker, Clarissa, and we would throw back quotes from this weekly. She would be like, "Oh, you can get that. You can it was in a British accent. You can get that edit done, can't you, Ben? Of course I can." It was always stuff to do with Tyrone.
Yeah. Which
Tyrone can move when he has to.
it's a 2-ton truck, Tyrone.
Yeah,
the
dialogue is
It's
superb.
You could literally just listen to this movie and still be enthralled. Like as much as the visuals are amazing as but just as like an audio only, you can do it. So there's a lot of times, Laura and I, when we're traveling, we're driving, we'll put on, there's like a website that says like listentoamovie.com or whatever. This is one of the ones that I always want to throw on is listen to a movie, just where it's just the audio only, the music and the dialogue. And I mean, I can obviously have seen this enough time, I could follow along without it, but it's so interesting just with the dialogue with this. I mean, Guy Ritchie nailed it out of the park. It's still my favorite of any of his writing stuff, but he is so quick in a lot of his movies. Like it's so deep, and he doesn't do a lot of tropeness stuff. I mean, like it's just, he does bring some stuff along from different movies, like the, repetitive kind of conversations of like you said, the of course I can, like just constantly kind of hitting that until it becomes just way too funny. But it never feels like he overdoes it, or he never feels like he's pushing it. It just feels like a natural part of the conversation, but it just is funny. And so, but
yeah, he does do that redundancy in the script. There's that scene with Turkish and Tommy near the end of the film, and Tommy's kind of asking him like, well, what happens if the Pikey doesn't go down in the 4th round? And he's like, well, I suppose we'll get murdered before we leave the ring, and they'll feed us to the pigs. And then the conversation progresses, and then he's like, well, but what if he does something else? And then he repeats the exact same verbiage. And you're right, he does that several times in the movie. Yeah, it's excellent screenwriting. It's aged well. The film is aged well. It does have, I only have the DVD. It's a pretty bleak movie still visually. Like everything's really cool colors. It's a lot of like blues and greens. And it's got like a less unified look than something like Fight Club, but there's scenes that are very reminiscent of Fight Club because the whole bare knuckle boxing ring is lit in a very similar manner with it's almost underlit to an extent, at least everything other than the ring. And yeah, the saturation's not real high. It's not black and white, but it's not a strong color grade, although I think for the 4K remaster, which they did 3 years ago, they put some of the saturation back in because it was almost too bleak. But it's a beautifully shot movie on 35, and it's one of those early 2000s gems that I think is aged well, and that I think more people should see. And it did very well though. I mean, it was a 6 million pounds was the budget, and it roughly made, I think, 85 million worldwide. But with
Still
that little investment, and it turns around, that's what launches his career in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Effectively.
So Tarantino is always kind of given a lot of credit for bringing out his music choices of like finding those really unused tracks or unknown tracks and then bringing them kind of into not so much the zeitgeist, but into like the world of like people are actually like, oh, this is a really good track. I don't remember this one. I have to say, like, Guy Ritchie is similar in that vein. Not so much like the unknown tracks, but he just knows what tracks to use. Like his musical choices in pretty much all his films that I've seen is fantastic. It is, especially this one, just some of the choices he's made, some of the things that like he picks up. Like I have the soundtrack. I love this soundtrack. Like absolutely adore the soundtrack. Just listen to it just because it's just great hits. And then some of this, like even some of the score is just done really, really well too. So it's, I mean, I don't know how much he had involvement, but I'm pretty sure Guy Ritchie is close to an auteur that he has his hand in just about every aspect of his film.
Well, and he got
But I
to
could be
start
wrong.
making music videos. So there's a lot of connections that way within the industry because, I mean, this is the movie that turned me on to like Massive Attack.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I hadn't listened to Massive Attack prior to seeing Snatch. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the soundtrack. Yeah, the soundtrack's still an absolute banger.
Yeah.
It's as good as there is. Although when I watched it, like sometimes in the movie, it feels like a set of music videos kind of butting up next to one another in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah.
Like where he lets the music just kind of do all the talking. I mean, the scene where Pitt's mom gets burned alive in her. And he just lets the music. There's a little bit of narration from Statham as Turkish. You know, that Bricktop thought it'd be a good idea to burn her caravan with her sleeping in it, and then the music rises and it's a really nice track, and you get a good visual with it. And the other director that kind of went crazy doing that was Soderbergh for Ocean's 12.
Yeah,
but it didn't work as well. Where he would just let scenes go forever with nothing but music playing in the background. There was no dialogue. And I feel like Ritchie had a good balance with this and still does. Still knows when to kind of flex his muscle from the music video standpoint. And his DP, his direct photography, which was Tim Maurice Jones, he has a background in music videos as well.
Okay, so
and
it helps. I mean, I would never
Yeah.
have thought that would be such a big help, but it works.
Well, you're really forced to develop a very, very distinctive visual style that separates you from everybody else if you're going to direct music videos. Unfortunately, that isn't really a growing segment for directors. Like the music videos kind of seen its day, and they still make them, but it's tough to like cut your teeth in music videos now and then try to launch a career in Hollywood. And this Guy Ritchie, and then maybe 10 years after him, is kind of the window is closing where they would do that, and with varying levels of success. I mean, was it McGee or something that directed Terminator Salvation, and they had a music video background. Basically, were handpicked because of the success of the music videos with the visual style. So it doesn't always work.
Well, and I remember the trailer for Terminator Salvation. It's probably one of my favorite trailers of all time. Is that
it's like the biggest head fake ever. Yeah.
Because it's like, what is it? Is it Soundgarden that they're playing over top of like the thing, or like 9 Inch? I forget who it was. It was some band, but like it comes in and and the helicopter flies and he steps on the Terminator's head. Anyways, I digress. But okay, going back to the music. In this watch through, there was something I noticed that I hadn't noticed before, and I thought it was super funny, and it shows Guy Ritchie really cares about the details. But so when they're introducing Bulletooth Tony, like not from the intro, but like when Doug the Head and Dennis Farina's character, Cousin Abby, are talking about, and the twins are like, what about Tony? And they cut to him, and it cuts to Tony getting shot in the club or whatever. So they're playing Madonna's Lucky Star
Yes.
in that club. And then, of course, it comes down where they get mullet, and he's dragging along, and he turns on the radio, and Lucky Star comes, and he's like, "Oh, that's my favorite song." And obviously I'd always recognized Lucky Star in that scene, but I never really picked up in the club scene. I'm like, dude, this is the same. This is the song. This is the song you got shot in, but yet it's still your favorite. I love that. I love that, those small little moments that it's this attention to detail that makes this movie so great. Like there's a moment like when Boris, his name gets spoken by Vinny and Saul or whatever and stuff like that, and he goes to shoot Benicio's Frankie Four Fingers or whatever. What he does first is he puts in ear guards or foam things in his ears, and then shoots the guy because he knows it's going to be too loud. And I'm like, it's these small things that are just hilarious.
Yeah, but my only gripe, and it's with Bullet Tooth Tony, and he's got the Desert Eagle. And there's no recoil on that gun whatsoever. None. He's in that hallway in the pub and just gatting Boris, and there's none.
One-handed.
One-handed. The thing never. There's no barrel rise. It's like, that's still one of the more
strongest man in the entire world.
Apparently, yes. But it's a movie, so what do I care? But I was going to say one of my favorite sequences in the whole movie, and it's just so beautifully done, is the non-linear nature of when Boris is got the hood over his head and he's walking around in the street. And the milk, the chocolate milk.
Yeah.
And then it all comes together. The edit is beautiful with that, and the comedic payoff is just... And then Boris, you think Boris is dead, and then he comes around the corner where Turkish and Tommy are, hits Tommy right in the nuts, and walks in the house, gets his AK, comes back. It's a riot. So, the build in this movie is flawless, and that really is a credit to the edit and to Guy Ritchie and the script. It ramps up and ramps up and ramps up and ramps up, and then the payoff is not what you expect, and everything's resolved in a nice, neat little bow, and it's tremendous.
It's done so well. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think Boris is my favorite character of the entire film, just because he has such great lines and he's just really hilarious. But he's a salesman. And like you talked about the things that you quote, this is my favorite quote. I say this all the time, like, because when he's talking with Tommy, he's like holding the gun. He's like, heavy is good, heavy is reliable. If it doesn't work, you can always hit it with him. And then he's selling it to someone else, and he's like, the weight. I think to Frankie Four Fingers, he's like, the weight is a sign of reliability. And I'm like, this is his pitch. His guns don't work, but they're heavy.
They're heavy. We quote that too. We quote it too. It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Yeah.
But then,
and the other one is the how much more longer on them sausages, Tommy? 2 minutes, Turkish. And then again, how much longer? 5 minutes. It was 2 minutes 5 minutes ago. Yeah. And the problem is that Ritchie peaked too soon with this. Mm-hmm. It sits at an 8.2 on IMDb. It's their number 121 rated movie out of the top 250. Mm-hmm. And he's made a lot of great movies since then, but like this is the second feature basically out of the gate, his first with a big name actor. And I wouldn't call it a perfect movie, but it's
close.
It's close. And so it's like, where do we go from here? That's really tough when some directors didn't seem to bother him. I mean, Spielberg, Jaws was in the first couple movies, and he didn't have a problem, trying to.
Yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, even Close Encounters after Jaws was superb. So, yeah, I like Guy Ritchie's stuff. In fact, I even like it got maligned, but I liked his take on King Arthur.
Oh yeah,
I think it was because the public had beaten it down so much, and by the time I got around to watching it, my expectations were pretty low, and I was like, oh, I rather like this.
Well, I'm really sad that The Man from U.N.C.L.E. didn't do very well, because
that's a good movie. That's a really good movie.
It did so poorly. There were supposed to actually be more of them, and I was all for
good.
it. It is so well done. But like, Snatch is my favorite, but I love Rock and Rolla. I think Rock and Roll is fantastic. Like, it's such a great film. I really like The Gentleman as well, with Matthew McConaughey in it, even though he's in it and he's not my favorite. But like, they're just so well done. It's all these, again, it's that attention to detail. It's that the ability for him to, like you said, kind of talking about like the stitching the comedic is doing these kind of separate scenes that all seem separate, but then combining them at the end for a wonderful payoff, whether it's comedic, whether it is for the story beat, whether it's for the emotional beat, but it just works. He constantly is doing that throughout the films. So, but again, it's the small moments. Like when I go back with Boris, when he gets called by his cousin or whatever, like the cousin's calling from Antwerp, he's talking in English, calling London, and Boris is responding in Russian. I feel like that juxtaposition is just hilarious.
It's
as well.
very
Like,
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although that guy's performance that plays is it his brother? I think they're brothers or something.
Okay. Yeah. There's something.
But his performance isn't very good. Like I was watching that again, the guy on the phone that called, I was like, but he's not in the movie very long. So
No.
but I think he was smart. Ritchie was smart to kind of drop some of the trappings that he's been known for when he made something like The Gentleman. Because it still felt like a Guy Ritchie film, but it didn't feel like he was leaning on some of this stuff that he has kind of brought to the forefront that you think of when you see a Guy Ritchie film. Yeah. So that kind of shows maturation as a director, and I enjoyed that film. I want another sequel to Sherlock Holmes. I enjoyed both of those films immensely.
I did,
and I'm guessing the Marvel contract with Downey Jr. as Iron Man put the kibosh on a third one, because from what I remember, the second one did well. Yeah,
I mean, it's got Laura's favorite scene in it, of when RDJ is riding that little small pony through the woods when everyone's riding horses, and he's coming.
Yes,
she cackles every single time she sees it. She loves that. She loves that scene. Going back, Lock, Stock versus Snatch. I'm just going to bring it up. One of the things I think that cements it for me is Alan Ford's performance as Bricktop. Because obviously in Lock, Stock, he's the bartender.
I was waiting for, I'm glad you brought him up, because to me, he is what gives this thing its weight as the baddie, as the big baddie. And without him, in fact, I was thinking when I was watching it, I think at least 50% of why I love this movie so much is the British nature of it. And I don't know how well or bad it did in the UK, but as an American, that his take on that whole crime subculture in London is just fabulous. Yeah. And I don't care if it's realistic or not. It doesn't really matter. But the whole nature of it being this very funny, very British movie is largely what makes it so attractive and rewatchable. And their differences in cadence and language that they use, and I like that they poke fun that Avi can't really make sense sometimes of what they're saying. I think there's a scene with Bullet Tooth Tony's like, "What are you saying?" And he has to basically translate the British English for him to explain what's going on. And and then that guy, that idiot in the back of the car, pulling out that freaking katana blade, and it's like, is he coming with us? Well, yeah, it just depends which part of him you want to come.
I love the fact that I love the travel kind of montage it's so quick, it's not even really a montage of cousin Avi coming from New York to London, like him flying the Concorde. Because one, he would definitely fly a Concorde. I mean, it's like less than 3 hours from New York to London. Why wouldn't you do that? And then immediately when like people die, nope, I'm out, I'm gone. Like he's like, he knows his limits. He's like, no, that's fine.
I still get sad when he accidentally kills Tony. Like, I've seen this movie dozens of times, and I'm just always like, oh no, because that's like my favorite. Yours is Boris, but my favorite character in the whole movie is Tony. I think Benny Jones is just fantastic. But yeah, the quick cut in that overhead shot with him taking the shot glass, and don't go to England. Anything to declare? Yeah, it's so quick. It's such a quick film.
It is.
It sits on my shelf and will have a treasured place there for basically forever.
Oh yeah, easily. How long is it actually? What is it?
Wasn't it like an hour 45 minutes or something like that?
Yeah,
it's less than 2
hour 42.
hours, and it moves.
That's crazy.
You're right. It moves at a breakneck speed. There's no wasted frames. There's no scenes where I'm like, this is dragging.
No, you definitely doesn't need to be cut 20 minutes or 10 minutes. I'm like, there's very little here that I can even think of that I want to cut. And I'm going to tell you, going back to the music, because it just popped into my head, and I cannot let this podcast episode end without me talking about this. But there is almost no better scene for me than when it's the first fight between Gorgeous George and Mickey. And it's like right after he gets kind of pushed down and he does the one punch, knocks Gorgeous out. And then the song Golden Brown comes out. And it's just like, I absolutely adore everything that's happening. And that song is just kind of playing this, not a melancholy song, but it's definitely a quieter song for something that just happened. And then it's Turkish narrating over top of it and just talks about Tommy being, if he's not scared, he should be, because if Gorgeous George doesn't wake up, they're going to kill him too.
Yeah.
Oh, like just the choices he makes, the ways he kind of plays with your emotions. He's a master when it comes to directing. He's definitely up there, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no other movie that looks like this, and they tried to do that spinoff. I never watched it, but I think 2017 they tried to do the TV show spinoff of it, and it didn't survive past, I think, 7 or 8 episodes. Because the world is pretty interesting, and you feel like there is something there potentially to work with if they were going to do some sort of streaming show on it. But that's been tried, and if he's not involved with it heavily, then it's not going to work because the dialogue is what carries this whole thing.
Definitely the dialogue and also the pacing, and it's hard to do that when you're doing 8, 10 episodes, 12 episodes of this is less than 2 hours and it feels great, but like. This is not one of those movies that I would want to see 12 hours worth. There'd be a whole lot of filler, there'd be, or not so much filler, but you'd have to have a really good story and good dialogue because you can only do some of these so much before it becomes too repetitive where it's no longer funny. So, again, he seems to break up some of these movies with other stuff that he does, but still keeps a little bit of it. I know, there's a lot of people who hate Revolver. I don't hate Revolver. It's not my favorite of his, but I understand why people don't like it. But what is it? He did. I'm looking at it now. So like he did Rock and Rolla, but then he did a ton of things before he did The Gentleman, which I feel are very similar to Snatch. We're talking 11 years between those two. He did the Sherlocks in between. He did Man from U.N.C.L.E. He did King Arthur. So it's not like he's just producing Snatch ripoffs. He's got other things, but I think that's what makes Rock and Rolla and The Gentleman work. Is even though they're not Snatch ripoffs, but they're in the vein. Is they're so far apart that it's like I'm ready for a new one. I'm ready to see what else he's got in the tank in this kind of vein of heist / underground London stuff.
I did want to jump back on the topic of the editor, John Harris. And it's interesting because Snatch was like based on IMDb, his first credited feature. Mm-hmm. He'd done a few shorts and then an episode of a TV series, but he does Snatch, and then Matthew Vaughn steals him away because he edits Layer Cake and Stardust and Kick-Ass. And Kingsman, The Secret Service, and he's done a couple episodes of Black Mirror, and he did the sequel to Trainspotting as well. And then he's got stuff coming up. But it's interesting that Ritchie didn't really work with him again. It's kind of a one-off, awesome. But
and bringing it back full circle, Layer Cake is where we got that fantastic rack exposure.
Yes.
Got it right. I got it right this time.
Yeah.
A year later, I get it right.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, obviously the kind of generic double feature would be to watch Lock, Stock, and Snatch, but I would recommend a double feature of Snatch and Layer Cake because of the connection with Vaughn, and then you got the same editor, and I think that would
see
make,
how those hold up.
Yeah, I think that would make because you have one film with kind of the happy ending, and then you have another one with
the not so happy,
with more the fatalist ending. So, and we will do Layer Cake. We've kind of been teasing that movie forever, like basically since one of the first episodes on the podcast, or even that teaser episode we did, where it was mentioned. But yeah, and we've never come around to doing Layer Cake, and we absolutely need to. But
there's a bunch of good movies that we're going to talk about this year. I can just feel it.
Yeah.
Like 2024 Cinema A to B is going to have some good stuff going on, and not just new movies coming out. I think we're going to revisit some really good ones. We hit some of the highs this time, but I think there's some gems out there that.
Yeah, I'm trying to rectify the fact that nobody knows this really, but we do break things down into seasons, but we don't actually, there's no good reason for it, because we've not really done a 13 episode season with a unified theme. And I want to rectify that this year.
Okay.
Where
do
we can come up with some capsules of 13 episodes of films or streaming shows or something like that have some sort of unifying theme. But yeah, we've been kind of just haphazardly going about it, given just whatever we want to. And we do really appreciate everybody that's chosen to download listen to episodes of the podcast. This
Thank you.
This was kind of just a fun little venture almost a year ago. It'll be a year at the end of January. And we just really appreciate it. I mean, it's kind of wild. And listeners all over the world, and shout out to folks listening in like the UK. We've got some listeners in the UK, and I know for a fact in Spain, and appreciate
Peru,
that. And
I mean, Sweden.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I mean, some of them these are friends and family, and then I'm going to tell you, there's locations that people are listening to this at that I don't know a single person there. So for those, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for finding us and listening to us. I really didn't think that we would be kind of this, not big, because we're obviously still very tiny, but I didn't even think we'd have this many listeners just listening to you and I ramble on about movies.
It's because people just don't
shows.
Have anything better to do, Alec. It was a slow news day.
It was 2023 was slow. There wasn't a whole lot going on. Not a content drought. I mean, writers and actors strike, obviously, so you got to find your content somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, but with that, just want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners, whether you are doing the audio only, you're on YouTube, or heck, if you're just watching the shorts, we really appreciate all of you very much for kind of tuning in, listening to us, and kind of keeping us being pushed on. I mean, we're both enjoying this. I know I'm still having a blast. We did this just for us, and if it brings any kind of enjoyment to you all, we really appreciate that, and we're really hopeful for that. So, Ben, final thoughts? Anything you want to add before we end this episode?
If somebody hasn't watched Snatch in a while, I think you need to go ahead and do it.
Oh, yeah.
And shout out to Thomas for his listenership, and he told me this was in his top 10, and I think that's an excellent choice in a top 10. It's not in mine. There's just only 10 slots.
It's hard. That's what I thought.
I might have to reconsider this, but it's just outside. It's probably top 20 if I had to pick my favorites.
So many good films. It's hard to. I got to do that little click the movies again to really kind of get a feeling of what's in my top 10 now.
Before we go, though, I do want to say one of my favorite scenes that just captures everything is when Tony enters the hallway, when everybody's dove down onto the ground, and he's already shot through the wall. And there's a music track that picks up there. I think it's like I don't know what the instrument is. I think it's a woodwind of some sort. And he releases his clip. It falls to the ground, and it's a dolly out away from him, and it's just so damn cool.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what drew me to this movie. Is I just think this thing is still oozes cool.
Yeah.
And
It's so
especially,
slick.
yeah, especially Tony. And then then we launched into the recoilless Desert Eagle .50.
Oh, my
But no, I do. We appreciate everybody listening to the pod. Next week, we will release an episode. Well, okay, so we'll push this episode to the podcast Monday. Following Monday, just to tease it, will be Mad Max Fury Road, which we've already recorded, and I look forward to pushing that one out. That's a fantastic piece of filmmaking as well.
Excellent film.
We're spoiled, man. There's so many good movies.
There's so much
Like
good
it
content
didn't
out
matter
there.
when they went on strike. There was just there's so much stuff to discuss and watch, and yeah,
to either revisit or just stuff that's already out that I haven't gotten to because there's so much new stuff coming out all the time. It's so I like my little my list of this is the stuff I want to watch. Like I didn't hit half of it for 2023 because there was just so much that was coming out that was hard to go back, and that's some of the stuff that was left over from 2022 that I never got to. And so it's difficult, but man, I'm excited for this year. There's gonna be some good stuff, but wow. All right. Well, that's Snatch. Well, just again, huge thank you to everybody. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you next time.